The bullet shattered the train window 3 inches from Emil Bauer's head, sending glass fragments into his thick German hair like deadly confetti. He threw himself to the floor of the passenger car as screams erupted around him, his massive frame wedged between wooden seats while chaos consumed the westbound locomotive. "Where's the big German?" a voice shouted from outside. "Victor wants him alive, but hurting's fine." Emil's heart hammered against his ribs as he clutched the crumpled rejection letter that had brought him to this moment. 3 months of correspondence with a Colorado widow. 3 months of hope carefully nursed like a dying ember, extinguished in 4 brutal sentences that had driven him to this godforsaken corner of Kansas where someone wanted him dead before he'd even stepped off the train. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Emil raised his head cautiously, peering through the shattered window at the desolate platform of Dust Creek Station. 4 men on horseback sat watching the train, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats, but their intent unmistakable. They'd been waiting for him specifically, which meant someone had known he was coming. Passengers remained seated. The conductor called out, his voice shaking. "We have a situation." Emil understood the situation perfectly. Somehow, his arrival in Dust Creek had been anticipated by people who meant him harm. The question was why and who. The train lurched forward, gaining speed as it left the station behind. Emil watched the mounted men through the broken window, memorizing their faces as they wheeled their horses and rode away. One of them, a lean man with silver hair, turned back to look at the departing train, and Emil caught a glimpse of cold eyes that promised this wasn't over, as the locomotive carried him toward whatever fate awaited in Dust Creek. Emil reflected on the chain of events that had brought him here. The mail-order marriage bureau rejection wasn't just a crushing personal blow. It was the final link in a long chain of disappointments that had driven him west, searching for a place where his size and foreign accent might be assets rather than liabilities. Now it seemed he'd found something else entirely, a place where someone wanted him dead on arrival. The train wheezed to a stop at a water tower 5 miles outside Dust Creek, black smoke billowing from its stack like a funeral pyre. Emil gathered his meager possessions, a canvas sack containing everything he owned in the world, and prepared to face whatever awaited him in this hostile territory. As he stepped onto the platform, the conductor approached with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Bauer, got a message for you from town." Emil accepted the folded paper immediately, recognizing the same handwriting as the rejection letter that had brought him here. But this message was different. Situation changed. "Come to Schultz Farm 3 miles west of town. Bring proof of employment skills. Opportunity awaits if you're brave enough to take it." Emil stared at the note, his mind racing. The Colorado widow had rejected him, but someone else apparently needed his services. The question was whether this opportunity was legitimate or another trap. He looked up to find the conductor watching him nervously. "You know anything about this? Just that the lady who sent it paid good money to make sure you got it." The conductor replied. "Also said to tell you that the men who shot up the train are connected to someone named Victor Kroll." "Mean anything to you?" Emil shook his head, but stored the name away for future reference. "Which way to the Schultz farm?" The conductor pointed west toward a horizon that seemed to stretch into infinity. "Follow the road. Can't miss it, only place out there with trees around it." As Emil shouldered his sack and began walking, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple job opportunity. The attack on the train suggested enemies he didn't know he had, while the mysterious message promised salvation from a source he couldn't identify. The Kansas prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, its vastness both beautiful and terrifying. Emil had grown up in crowded German cities where privacy was a luxury and neighbors were always within shouting distance. This landscape offered a different kind of solitude, one that could either heal a man's soul or drive him mad with isolation. After an hour of walking, he crested a low hill and saw the Schultz farm spread out below him like a promise and a warning combined. The house was small but solid, built from local limestone that had weathered decades of prairie storms. A red barn stood beside it, and fields stretched away in all directions, some showing the stubble of harvested crops, others lying fallow for winter. But what struck Emil most was the silence. No sounds of human activity, no smoke from the chimney, no signs of life, except for a few chickens scratching in the dirt. If someone lived here, they were either very quiet or very good at hiding. Emil approached the farmhouse cautiously, his hand near the knife he carried for protection. The front door was solid wood, painted green, but weathered by prairie winds. He knocked 3 times and waited. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. "Hello, I'm Emil Bauer. I received a message about employment." The silence stretched so long that Emil began to wonder if he'd been sent to an abandoned farm as part of some elaborate joke. Then he heard a sound from inside, the soft scrape of a chair being moved, followed by footsteps that seemed deliberately quiet. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman who looked like she'd been carved from the same tough stone as her house. She was small, maybe 5.5 feet, with hair the color of winter wheat pulled back severely from a face that might have been beautiful if it weren't so marked by hardship. Her dress was practical, patched in places, but clean, and her hands were calloused from work he recognized. Farm work, real work. She looked him up and down with eyes that missed nothing, taking in his size, his worn clothes, his foreign features. But unlike the hostile stares, he'd grown accustomed to her gaze, held something different, a careful evaluation that suggested she was judging his character rather than his appearance. She stepped aside and gestured for him to enter, but didn't speak. Emil followed her into a kitchen that was sparse but clean, dominated by a large wooden table and a stone fireplace that provided the room's only warmth. The woman moved to the table and picked up a piece of slate and a stub of chalk. She wrote something in careful script and showed it to him. "Are you the one who answered the advertisement?" Emil frowned, confused. "I didn't answer any advertisement. I received a message at the train station telling me to come here." The woman erased the slate and wrote again, "Show me the message." Emil handed her the paper he'd received from the conductor. She read it carefully, her expression growing more puzzled with each line. She wrote, "I didn't send this. Someone else did, using my name." A chill ran down Emil's spine as the implications hit him. Someone had lured him here under false pretenses, using the Schultz farm as bait. But why and who? The woman saw his expression and wrote quickly, "Danger. Maybe," Emil said grimly. "Someone shot at the train when I arrived in Dust Creek. They were looking for me specifically." The woman's face went pale. She wrote, "Victor Kroll. You know him." She nodded and wrote, "Dangerous man. Wants this farm. Tried to court me after my husband died. When I refused, he threatened to take what he wanted by force." Emil felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "Someone wants me here for a reason. Either to help you or to hurt you. I can't tell which yet." The woman studied him for a long moment, then wrote, "My name is Anna Schultz. I lost my voice after my husband died. Been alone here for 2 years. Emil Bauer, I'm sorry for your loss." Anna nodded and wrote, "Why would someone want to hurt you? You seem like a good man." "I don't know," Emil admitted. "But I'd like to find out. And if Victor Kroll is involved, maybe we can help each other." Anna erased her slate and wrote, "How? By figuring out who wants me here and why. By protecting this farm from whoever's threatening it. By standing together instead of facing our problems alone." Anna stared at the words on her slate for a long moment, then looked up at Emil with an expression that seemed to be weighing his soul. Finally, she wrote, "1-week trial. Meals and barn loft. If you prove trustworthy, we'll discuss permanent arrangements." Emil felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. Deal. As Anna prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and coffee, Emil found himself studying her movements. She was economical in everything she did, wasting neither motion nor energy. Her silence wasn't the sullen quiet of someone who chose not to speak, but the careful conservation of someone who'd learned that words were precious and should be used sparingly. When she set the food before him, Emil wrote on her slate, "Thank you for trusting me." Anna read it and smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth he'd seen from her. She wrote, "Don't thank me yet. Trust has to be earned." As Emil ate the simple meal, he found himself thinking about the attack on the train and the mysterious message that had brought him here. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to manipulate events, to put him in this specific place at this specific time. The question was whether that someone was friend or enemy. Outside, the prairie wind picked up, rattling the windows and carrying the scent of distant storms. Emil looked across the table at Anna, who was watching him with careful attention, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sense that he might actually belong somewhere. Whether that somewhere was safe remained to be seen. The first attack came at dawn on Emil's third day at the farm, announced by the sound of cattle lowing in distress. Emil rolled from his blankets in the barn loft and peered through the hay door's opening to see 3 of Anna's milk cows lying motionless in the pasture, their bodies twisted in unnatural positions. He climbed down the ladder, quickly grabbing the rifle Anna had given him for protection. The morning air was crisp with the promise of winter, and his breath formed small clouds as he approached the dead animals. Anna emerged from the house, her face grim with the recognition of deliberate destruction. She approached with her slate already in hand. Emil knelt beside the nearest cow, examining its mouth and nose. Something fast-acting. No foam, no signs of struggle. Professional work. Who would do this? Emil stood, his expression dark. Someone who wants to hurt you without being traced. Someone who understands that killing livestock is economic warfare. Anna wrote Victor's style. Hurt me slowly, make me desperate enough to accept his offer. What offer? Anna hesitated, then wrote, marry him or lose everything. Emil felt cold anger settle in his chest. When did he make this offer? 2 weeks ago. Day before the mysterious message about you appeared. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Emil studied Anna's face, seeing fear there, but also determination. He's escalating because you refused him. Anna nodded and wrote, the question is what he plans to do with you. Emil had been wondering the same thing. Someone had lured him to this farm under false pretenses, using Anna's name. Someone had also arranged for him to be shot at on arrival. The 2 events seemed contradictory, unless they were part of a larger plan he didn't understand yet. We need to be ready for whatever comes next, Emil said. And we need to find out who's really behind this. Anna wrote, Martha Crenshaw at the feed store keeps records of everyone who passes through town. If we can find out who sent that message. Good thinking. I'll ride to town today, ask some questions. Too dangerous. They tried to kill you once already. Emil met her eyes. They tried to kill me on the train. But I'm not on the train anymore, and I'm not alone. Anna's expression softened slightly. She wrote, we're strangers. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, Emil said quietly. But some fights are worth having even when you're not sure you can win. That afternoon, Emil rode Anna's horse to Dust Creek, his rifle across his saddle and his eyes scanning the horizon for threats. The town was larger than he'd expected, with a main street lined with businesses and several side streets that suggested a permanent population rather than just a stopover for travelers. The Crenshaw feed store sat at the center of town, its weathered sign creaking in the prairie wind. Emil tied his horse to the hitching post and pushed through the door, triggering a bell that announced his arrival to the world. The store's interior was organized chaos, sacks of grain stacked to the ceiling, tools hanging from every available surface, and the smell of dust and leather that seemed to cling to everything. Behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes looked up from a ledger book. You must be Emil Bauer, she said without preamble. I'm Martha Crenshaw. I've been expecting you. Emil's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle. How did you know my name? Because I'm the one who sent that message bringing you to Anna's farm. Martha closed the ledger and studied him with obvious interest. Also because you're the only German giant who's shown up in Dust Creek recently. Why? Because Anna Schultz needed help and you looked like someone who might provide it. Martha came around the counter moving with the confidence of someone who'd handled difficult situations before. Also because Victor Kroll is a snake, and snakes need to be dealt with before they bite. Emil relaxed slightly, but kept his hand near his weapon. You knew about the attack on the train. I knew Victor had hired men to watch for you. I didn't know they'd be stupid enough to shoot up a passenger car in broad daylight. Martha shook her head in disgust. That man's getting desperate, which makes him dangerous. How do you know Victor? He's been sniffing around town for months, buying information, making threats, trying to find Anna's weaknesses. Martha's expression hardened. He offered me money to spy on her. I told him where he could put his money. Emil felt a measure of respect for the woman. What does he really want? Anna herself. The farm is just a means to an end. Martha moved to the window and peered out at the street. Victor's the kind of man who believes he's entitled to whatever he wants. When Anna refused his proposal, he took it as a personal insult that needs to be corrected. By force. By whatever means necessary. Victor's got money connections and a complete lack of conscience. He's used the same tactics on other women in other counties. Usually they give up and disappear rather than fight. Emil thought about Anna's quiet strength, her careful way of moving through the world. Anna won't disappear. No. Martha agreed. She won't. Which is why Victor's getting desperate, and why he arranged for you to be here. I don't understand. Martha turned from the window to face him directly. Victor didn't just lure you here randomly, Mr. Bauer. He researched you, learned about your background, your skills, your reputation. What reputation? The reputation of a man who's good in a fight. A man who's been in trouble before and knows how to handle himself. Martha's expression was grim. Victor wants Anna to have a protector so he can take that protector away from her. He wants her to experience hope before he crushes it. Emil felt ice in his veins. He's planning to kill me, eventually. But first, he wants to use you to hurt Anna. Make her care about you, then take you away. Break her spirit completely so she'll accept his offer without further resistance. The calculating cruelty of the plan took Emil's breath away. How do you know all this? Because Victor's not as smart as he thinks he is. He hired a man named Jake Morrison to gather information about you. Morrison's got a loose tongue when he's drinking, and he's been drinking a lot lately. Martha pulled a folded paper from her apron. This is what Morrison learned about you. Emil unfolded the paper and felt his blood run cold. It contained details about his life that he'd never shared with anyone, his childhood in Germany, his arrival in America, his history of violence in defense of himself and others. But it also contained lies, exaggerations, that painted him as a dangerous criminal rather than a man who'd fought only when he had no choice. Where did this information come from? Some of it's true, some of it's manufactured. Victor paid good money to have a story created that would serve his purposes. Martha's voice was quiet but firm. The question is what you're going to do about it. Emil looked up from the paper, his mind racing. What do you mean? I mean, you have a choice, Mr. Bauer. You can leave town tonight and never look back, or you can stay and fight. But if you stay, you need to know that Victor's got resources you don't have. Money men connections. This won't be a fair fight. Emil thought about Anna's quiet strength, about the way she trusted him, despite having every reason to be suspicious. He thought about the dead cattle in her pasture and the fear in her eyes when she wrote Victor's name. What kind of help can you provide? Martha smiled grimly. Information, supplies, a place to hide if things go bad. And maybe if you can prove Victor's committed crimes, a way to bring him down legally. What kind of crimes? Fraud for starters. Victor's been using forged documents to claim debts that don't exist. I've got records of his activities, but I need more evidence to make it stick in court. Emil folded the paper and put it in his coat pocket. What do you need me to do? Survive long enough to help Anna fight back. And maybe, if you're willing to take the risk, help me set a trap that will expose Victor's crimes once and for all. Emil considered the proposal. It was dangerous, potentially deadly, and offered no guarantee of success. But it also offered something he'd never had before, the chance to fight for something that mattered, something beyond his own survival. I'm in, he said quietly. Martha nodded, unsurprised by his decision. Then God help us all. Because Victor Kroll doesn't lose gracefully, and he doesn't forgive people who cross him. As Emil rode back to Anna's farm through the gathering dusk, Martha's words echoed in his mind. He was walking into a war he didn't fully understand, against an enemy with advantages he couldn't match. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was fighting for something worth the risk. The farmhouse glowed with lamplight as he approached, and Anna emerged from the kitchen to meet him. She looked at his face and immediately reached for her slate. Bad news. Mixed news, Emil said, dismounting. I know who sent the message that brought me here, and I know what Victor's planning. Anna's expression grew tense. Tell me. As Emil related his conversation with Martha, he watched Anna's face cycle through surprise anger and finally a kind of grim determination. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Finally she wrote, So Victor wants to use you to hurt me. That's the plan, but plans can be changed. How? Emil met her eyes. By turning his trap into our trap. By making him think he's winning right up until the moment we destroy him. Anna studied his face, reading something there that made her expression soften. She wrote, Why are you willing to risk this for me? Emil thought about the question, about the loneliness he'd carried for so long, and the unexpected warmth he'd found in Anna's company. Because, he said finally, I've spent my whole life being the outsider, the one who doesn't belong. For the first time, I've found someone who makes me feel like I might actually have a place in the world. Anna's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. She wrote, You do belong. Here. With me. Emil felt something settle into place in his chest, a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. Whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. And neither would Anna. The trap was set, the battle lines drawn. Now all that remained was to see who would emerge victorious from the coming storm. The escalation began with fire. Emil woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of Anna's voice, the first time he'd heard her speak since his arrival. She was standing in the barn doorway, silhouetted against orange flames that licked at the edges of her chicken coop. Emil, help me. He rolled from his blankets, pulled on his boots, and ran toward the fire. Anna was already there with buckets of water, her face streaked with soot and determination. Together, they managed to save most of the structure. But the message was clear. Victor was done with subtlety. As they stood in the smoky aftermath, Anna wrote on her slate, He's moving faster than we expected. Because he knows we're onto him. Emil replied, studying the burn patterns. This wasn't random. Look at how the fire started, multiple points of ignition, all carefully placed to cause maximum damage without spreading to the barn or house. Warning. Exactly. He's telling us he could have burned everything if he'd wanted to. Next time he might. Anna erased her slate and wrote, How long do we have? Emil considered the question. Martha had said Victor was getting desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. But they also became more dangerous, more willing to take risks that rational people would avoid. Not long, maybe a few days before he makes his real move. What's his real move? Taking you. Either by force or by making you so desperate that you agree to marry him for protection. Anna's jaw tightened. She wrote, Never. Emil nodded, but he was thinking about the fire, about the casual way Victor had demonstrated his power. The man had resources, connections, and a complete willingness to use violence to get what he wanted. Standing against him would require more than determination. It would require a plan that turned his advantages into weaknesses. "We need to talk to Martha again," Emil said, "and we need to do it soon." The next morning brought a visitor that changed everything. Anna was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when Emil heard the sound of a single horse approaching fast. He looked out the window to see a young man on a lathered horse riding like he was carrying urgent news. Emil met him in the yard, hand on his rifle. "What's your business here?" "The message for Anna Schultz." The rider gasped, dismounting. "From Martha Crenshaw. She says it's urgent." Emil took the folded paper, noting the broken seal and the shaking handwriting. Martha's usual careful script was replaced by hurried scrawl. "Victor's men took Jake Morrison. They know Morrison talked to me. Moving against us tonight. Come to town immediately. Don't trust anyone else." Emil's blood ran cold. If Victor had Morrison, then he knew about the information network Martha had built. More importantly, he knew that Emil and Anna were actively working against him. Anna appeared in the doorway, slate in hand. She saw Emil's expression and wrote, "What is it?" Emil showed her the message. Anna read it twice, her face growing pale. She wrote, "Trap, maybe, but we can't ignore it. If Martha's in danger." Anna nodded grimly. She wrote, "We go together." "No, if it's a trap, we can't both walk into it." Anna shook her head emphatically and wrote, "Together or not at all." Emil started to argue, then saw the determination in her eyes. Anna Schultz had been making difficult decisions alone for 2 years. She wasn't going to stop now. "All right," he said, "but we go carefully, and we go prepared for trouble." They rode to Dust Creek together, rifles across their saddles, and eyes scanning the horizon for signs of ambush. The town looked normal as they approached, people going about their business, children playing in the streets, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts. But Emil noticed subtle things, fewer people than usual conversations, that stopped when they rode past, glances that lingered too long. The Crenshaw feed store stood with its door hanging open, but no customers visible inside. Emil and Anna dismounted cautiously, tying their horses to the hitching post, but keeping their weapons ready. "Martha," Emil called out as they entered. No answer. They moved through the store, carefully checking behind counters and stacked merchandise. The building was empty, but there were signs of hasty departure. An overturned chair papers scattered across the floor, a coffee cup still warm to the touch. Anna wrote on her slate, "Where is she?" Before Emil could answer, they heard footsteps on the store's back stairs. Martha Crenshaw appeared in the doorway, but she wasn't alone. A man Emil didn't recognize stood behind her, pressing a gun to her spine. "Come in, both of you," the man said quietly. "Hands where I can see them." Emil considered going for his rifle, but the man's positioning made it impossible to shoot without hitting Martha. Reluctantly, he raised his hands. "Smart choice," the man said. "I'm Jake Morrison, by the way. I believe we have some mutual interests." Emil stared at the man, who was supposed to be Victor's prisoner. "Martha said you were taken." Morrison laughed. "Martha says a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're all true." Understanding hit Emil like a physical blow. "You're working for Victor." "I've been working for Victor from the beginning." Martha Crenshaw thought she was so clever, building her little network of spies and informants. She never realized one of her informants was feeding information back to the man she was trying to destroy. Anna wrote frantically on her slate, "How long?" Morrison read the question and smiled. "How long have I been watching you? Months, Mrs. Schultz. Watching reporting, helping Victor plan his campaign. Did you really think a man like Victor Kroll would leave anything to chance?" Emil felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The attack on the train that was real. Oh yes. Victor wanted you scared, wanted you to think you were in danger. Made you more likely to trust Martha when she offered to help. Morrison's smile was cold. Amazing how people will believe anything when they're desperate. "What does Victor want?" Emil asked. What he's always wanted. Anna Schultz, broken and desperate, willing to accept his protection in exchange for marriage. But you complicated things, Mr. Bauer. You were supposed to be a temporary protector, someone Anna would care about just long enough for Victor to take him away. Instead, you started actually fighting back. Anna was writing on her slate, her movements sharp with anger. Where is Victor? Waiting for you, naturally. He's been very patient, but his patience has limits. Morrison gestured toward the back door. He set up a meeting. Just the four of us. Time to settle this once and for all. Emil weighed their options. Morrison had Martha at gunpoint, but he was also standing in a position that offered limited mobility. If Emil could create a distraction— What kind of meeting? Emil asked, taking a small step forward. The kind where you and Martha disappear permanently and Anna finally accepts the reality of her situation. Morrison's grip tightened on his gun. Victor's tried to be civilized about this, but civility has its limits. Anna wrote on her slate, "Victor's not here." Morrison read the message and nodded. "Very perceptive, Mrs. Schultz. Victor's waiting at your farm. He thought it would be symbolic to conclude this business on the property that's caused so much trouble." Emil felt ice in his veins. If Victor was at the farm, then this entire situation was a manipulation designed to get them away from their base of operations. "What's he doing there?" "Preparing a warm welcome for your return. Victor's a thorough man, Mr. Bauer. He doesn't like to leave loose ends." Emil made his decision. In one fluid motion, he dove to his left, rolled behind a stack of grain sacks, and came up with his rifle. Morrison tried to track him, but Martha chose that moment to elbow him in the ribs, spoiling his aim. Morrison's shot went wide, punching a hole in a sack of flour. Emil's shot didn't. Morrison fell backward, clutching his shoulder and cursing. His gun skittered across the floor, coming to rest near Anna's feet. She picked it up with steady hands, her face set in an expression of grim determination. Martha rubbed her ribs, but seemed otherwise unharmed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I was beginning to think I'd made a serious error in judgment." Emil kept his rifle trained on Morrison, who was bleeding but conscious. "How much of what you told us was true?" "Enough to keep you interested." Morrison gasped. Victor really does want Anna. He really has been planning this for months. And he really is waiting at the farm with enough men to make sure this ends his way. "How many men?" Morrison smiled through his pain. "Enough." Anna wrote on her slate, "We have to go back." Emil understood her reasoning. The farm was her home, her sanctuary, the place where she'd built a life with her husband and tried to rebuild it after his death. But it was also a trap, a place where Victor could control the environment and the outcome. "He's expecting us to come back," Emil said. "He's had time to prepare to set up whatever ambush he's planned." Anna wrote, "Then we don't give him what he expects." Emil looked at her, seeing something in her eyes that made his breath catch. "What do you mean?" Anna erased her slate and wrote, "Victor wants me desperate. Wants me to think I have no choice but to accept his protection. What if I give him what he wants?" "Anna, no." She held up her hand and wrote, "Not really." "But what if I make him think I'm surrendering?" "Get close enough to turn the tables." Emil stared at the words, understanding the desperate logic behind them. "That's incredibly dangerous." Anna wrote, "Everything's dangerous now. But this way, we might have a chance." Martha stepped forward, wincing from her bruised ribs. "She's right. Victor's weakness is his obsession with Anna. If she approaches him voluntarily, he might let his guard down." Emil looked between the two women, seeing determination in both their faces. "And if he doesn't?" Anna wrote, "Then we fight. But at least we fight on our terms, not his." Emil considered the plan. It was risky, potentially suicidal, and completely dependent on Victor's arrogance overriding his caution. But it was also the only option that offered any hope of survival. "All right," he said finally. "But we do this my way, and we do it together." Anna smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth he'd seen from her in days. She wrote together. As they prepared to leave Dust Creek, Emil found himself thinking about the moment when he'd first seen Anna in this same store, watching him with eyes that understood loneliness and loss. They'd come a long way from that first tentative trust, but the journey was far from over. The final confrontation awaited them at Anna's farm, where Victor Kroll waited with his men and his obsession. Emil didn't know if they would survive what was coming, but he knew they would face it together. And sometimes he'd learned that was enough. The farm looked deceptively peaceful as they approached through the gathering dusk. Lamplight glowed in the kitchen windows, smoke rose from the chimney, and everything appeared exactly as they'd left it that morning. But Emil noticed details that made his blood run cold. Fresh horse tracks in the yard, a different pattern of light in the barn, and the subtle wrongness that came from familiar places occupied by hostile strangers. Anna saw it too. She wrote on her slate, how many? Emil studied the tracks and the positioning of shadows, the way the horses in the corral seemed more restless than usual. At least 6 men, maybe more. They're trying to make it look normal, but they're not farmers. They don't know how to make a farm feel right. Victor, in the house most likely. He'll want to be comfortable while he waits. Anna erased her slate and wrote plan. Emil had been thinking about that during the ride from town. Victor's weakness was his obsession with Anna. He wanted her alive, unharmed, and ultimately grateful for his protection. That gave them an advantage, but only if they could exploit it before he realized what was happening. You approach the house alone, Emil said quietly. I'll circle around, get into position behind the barn. When you signal, I'll move. What signal? Emil thought about that. Anna's voice had returned during moments of extreme stress, but he couldn't count on that happening again. They needed something more reliable. And light a second lamp in the kitchen window. That'll tell me you're ready. Anna nodded and wrote, if something goes wrong, then we fight our way out. But let's try to make sure nothing goes wrong. Anna reached over and squeezed his hand briefly, a gesture that carried more weight than any words could have. Then she straightened her shoulders, tucked her slate into her belt, and began walking toward the farmhouse. Emil watched her go, marveling at her courage. She looked small and vulnerable, crossing the yard alone. But he knew better. Anna Schultz had survived losses that would have broken weaker people. She'd rebuilt her life from nothing, defended her home against threats that would have sent most people running, and found the strength to trust again when trust seemed impossible. If anyone could face Victor Kroll and survive, it was Anna. Emil circled wide around the farm buildings, using the growing darkness to conceal his movement. The barn cast long shadows that provided cover, and he was able to reach his position without being detected. From here, he could see the kitchen window and the yard between the house and barn. Anna knocked on her own front door, an act that must have cost her considerable effort. She was asking permission to enter her own home, acknowledging Victor's temporary dominance over her territory. The door opened, spilling yellow light into the yard. Victor Kroll stood silhouetted in the doorway, and Emil got his first clear look at the man who'd caused so much suffering. Victor was older than Emil had expected, perhaps 50, with silver hair and the soft build of someone who'd lived comfortably for many years. But his eyes were cold and calculating, and the way he looked at Anna made Emil's skin crawl. "Anna, my dear," Victor said, his voice carrying across the yard with false warmth. "I was beginning to worry you wouldn't come home tonight." Anna said nothing, but Emil could see the tension in her shoulders as she stepped into the house. The door closed behind them, cutting off his view, but not his concern. Emil settled into position behind the barn, his rifle ready, and his eyes fixed on the kitchen window. Minutes passed like hours as he waited for Anna's signal, listening to the muffled sounds of conversation from inside the house. Then he saw movement in the darkness. 2 men emerging from the barn's far side, moving toward the house with the careful precision of experienced killers. They hadn't seen him yet, but they would soon if he stayed in his current position. Emil had a choice: maintain his position and risk being discovered, or move and potentially miss Anna's signal. He chose a third option, slipping deeper into the shadows and working his way around to where he could see both the kitchen window and the approaching men. Inside the house, Anna faced Victor across her own kitchen table, the familiar space made alien by his presence. He'd made himself comfortable pouring coffee from her pot and sitting in Heinrich's chair like he belonged there. "You look tired, Anna," Victor said, studying her face with proprietary interest. "This whole business has been hard on you, hasn't it?" Anna nodded and reached for her slate, but Victor held up his hand. "Please, no need for writing tonight. I know you can speak when you choose to. I heard you calling for help during the fire." Anna remained silent, but Victor seemed content with her presence. He sipped his coffee and continued talking. "I want you to know I take no pleasure in what's happened. The dead cattle, the fire, the threats, all of it was necessary to help you understand your situation. A woman alone on the frontier faces terrible dangers. You need protection, Anna. You need a man who can provide for you, defend you, give you the security you deserve." Anna found her voice rusty from disuse, but clear with determination. "I don't need your protection, Victor. I need you to leave my property and never come back." Victor's smile faltered slightly. "Still fighting, I see. I admire that, truly I do. But fighting without hope is just stubbornness, Anna. And stubbornness can be dangerous." "What happened to Jake Morrison?" Victor looked surprised by the question. "Morrison? He's fine as far as I know." "Why do you ask?" Anna felt a chill of understanding. Morrison had been shot in town, but Victor didn't know about it. Which meant Morrison had been working for Victor without Victor's direct knowledge, a freelancer selling information to the highest bidder. "Where's Emil?" Anna asked. "Your German friend, I assume he's wherever you left him. Unless you mean to tell me he abandoned you when things got difficult." Victor's tone was mocking. That would be disappointing, but not surprising. Men like that rarely stay when the situation becomes complicated. Anna realized Victor didn't know Emil was outside, didn't know about the confrontation in town, didn't know his carefully laid plans were already unraveling. She moved to the window, ostensibly to close the curtains, and lit a second lamp. "Hold tonight," she said, as if explaining the extra light. Outside, Emil saw the signal and began moving toward the house. But as he crossed the open ground between buildings, he heard the soft whistle that meant lookouts were communicating. Victor's men had spotted him. Emil dove sideways as gunfire erupted from 3 different positions. Bullets sparked off the ground where he'd been standing, and muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks. He rolled behind a water trough, wood splintering around him as the shooting continued. Inside the house, Victor leaped to his feet at the sound of gunfire. "What the hell?" Anna picked up the coffee pot and threw it at his head. Victor ducked, and the pot shattered against the wall, spraying hot coffee across the kitchen. Anna ran for the door, but Victor caught her arm and spun her around. "Not going somewhere, my dear." Anna drove her knee toward Victor's groin, but he twisted aside and backhanded her across the face. She staggered, tasting blood, but stayed on her feet. "Now that's hardly ladylike behavior," Victor said, pulling a pistol from his coat. "I'd hoped we could conclude this business civilly, but you seem determined to make things difficult." Outside, Emil had managed to reach the porch using the house itself as cover from Victor's men. But he could hear Anna's voice through the walls, and it sounded like she was in immediate danger. He kicked in the kitchen door just as Victor raised his pistol. "Let her go." Emil said, his rifle trained on Victor's chest. Victor smiled coldly. "The famous Emil Bauer. You're larger than I expected, but not as smart. Did you really think you could walk into my trap and walk out again?" "Your trap?" Emil kept his rifle steady. "Seems to me you're the one with a gun pointed at you. 1 gun against 6 men. Poor odds, don't you think?" Emil could hear Victor's men moving outside, positioning themselves for a coordinated assault. Victor was right about the odds. But Emil had faced worse situations with less at stake. Maybe, Emil said. But you'll be dead before your men get through that door. Victor's smile faded slightly. He was used to intimidating people with threats and superior numbers, not facing someone who seemed genuinely willing to die fighting. What do you want? Victor asked. Simple. You leave Anna alone. You leave this county and never come back. You forget this farm exists. And if I refuse? Emil's smile was as cold as Victor's had been. Then we find out how good your men are at following orders from a dead leader. Anna, who had been standing quietly beside the overturned table, suddenly spoke in a voice that carried across the room like a bell. Emil, there's something you need to know about Victor. Both men looked at her, surprised by the strength in her voice. Tell him, Victor. Anna continued. Tell him about Heinrich. Tell him how my husband really died. Victor's face went white. Anna, don't. Heinrich didn't die of illness. Anna said, her voice growing stronger with each word. He was poisoned, slowly, carefully over a period of months. And Victor was the one who did it. Emil felt the world shift beneath his feet. What? Victor couldn't stand that I'd chosen Heinrich over him. So he decided to remove the obstacle. He posed as a traveling medicine salesman, convinced Heinrich to buy a tonic that was supposed to help with his strength. But the tonic was poisoned just a little at a time, not enough to be detected, but enough to kill a man slowly. Victor raised his pistol, pointing it at Anna's head. Shut up, Anna. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Anna replied calmly. I found the bottles, Victor. Hidden in the barn where you thought I'd never look. I had Doc Peterson analyze what was left in them. Arsenic mixed with herbs to disguise the taste. Emil stared at Victor, understanding flooding through him like ice water. You murdered her husband. I removed an obstacle to my happiness. Victor said, his mask of civility finally slipping completely. Heinrich Schultz was a weak man who didn't deserve a woman like Anna. I gave her what she needed, a reason to need protection, a reason to accept my offer. You're insane. I'm practical. Anna belongs with me. She always has. Heinrich was just temporary. Anna stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority. I will never belong to you, Victor. Not if you kill Emil, not if you kill me, not if you burn down half of Kansas. You're a murderer and a coward, and I'd rather die than spend one day as your wife. Victor's face contorted with rage. Then die you shall, my dear. Both of you. He swung the pistol toward Emil, but Anna threw herself between them. The gun discharged, the sound deafening in the closed space. Anna cried out and fell to her knees, clutching her shoulder. Emil's rifle roared in response. Victor was thrown backward against the wall, a spreading stain of red across his white shirt. He slid to the floor, his pistol clattering away across the wooden boards. Anna. Emil dropped his rifle and knelt beside her. The bullet had creased her shoulder, drawing blood, but not causing serious damage. How bad is it? I'll live, Anna said, her voice shaky but determined. But we need to deal with Victor's men. Emil looked toward the door, expecting Victor's gunmen to come charging through at any moment. Instead, he heard voices outside, not angry shouts, but conversation that sounded almost casual. What the hell? Emil moved to the window and peered out carefully. Sheriff Palmer stood in the yard, his hands raised, while 3 of Victor's men kept him covered with rifles. But the sheriff didn't look frightened. He looked angry. You men are under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder, Palmer was saying. Drop your weapons and surrender peacefully. One of Victor's men laughed. You're a little outnumbered for making arrests, Sheriff. Maybe, but I'm not alone. As if summoned by his words, men emerged from concealment around the farm buildings. Emil recognized some of them townspeople from Dust Creek, farmers from neighboring properties, even Martha Crenshaw carrying a shotgun that looked bigger than she was. Victor's men found themselves outnumbered 3 to 1 by people who looked like they knew how to use their weapons. After a brief tense moment, They lowered their rifles and raised their hands. Anna struggled to her feet, leaning on Emil for support. How did they know to come? Emil helped her to a chair and then looked out the window again. Martha Crenshaw was directing the townspeople like a general commanding troops, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Martha," Emil said. "She must have sent word while we were dealing with Morrison." Anna managed a weak smile. "Remind me to thank her properly." Emil looked down at Victor, who was still breathing but unconscious from blood loss. "What do we do with him?" "Let the law handle him. We have evidence of Heinrich's murder now, plus attempted murder conspiracy and a dozen other charges. Victor Kroll won't be bothering anyone ever again." Sheriff Palmer entered the house, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene. "Everyone all right in here? Anna's wounded, but she'll be fine," Emil replied. "Victor's alive but unconscious." Palmer knelt beside Victor, checking his pulse. "He'll live to stand trial, which is more than he deserves considering what he's done." "You knew about Heinrich?" Anna asked. Palmer nodded reluctantly. "Had suspicions for months, but no proof. When Martha sent word about what was happening here tonight, I decided it was time to act on those suspicions." Anna looked at Emil, her eyes bright with tears that might have been relief or grief or simple exhaustion. "It's over." Emil took her hand gently. "It's over." But even as he said the words, Emil knew they weren't entirely true. Victor's reign of terror was ended, but the damage he'd caused would take time to heal. Anna would need to recover from her physical wounds and the emotional trauma of learning the truth about her husband's death. The community would need to rebuild trust and confidence in their institutions. Most importantly, Emil and Anna would need to figure out what came next for them. They'd been thrown together by crisis and held together by mutual need. Now that the crisis was over, they would discover whether what they'd built could survive in peacetime. The trials that followed became the talk of 3 counties, drawing newspaper reporters from as far away as Kansas City to witness the unraveling of Victor Kroll's criminal enterprise. Sheriff Palmer, motivated by guilt over his earlier inaction, proved surprisingly effective at gathering evidence once he put his mind to it. The investigation revealed the full scope of Victor's activities. Heinrich's murder was just the beginning. Victor had used similar tactics on other women in other counties, always careful to spread his crimes across different jurisdictions to avoid detection. The pattern was always the same: identify a vulnerable woman with valuable property, eliminate obstacles to his courtship, then use threats and intimidation to force acceptance of his marriage proposal. Anna testified about Heinrich's slow decline and death, her voice growing stronger and more confident as she spoke. When Victor's lawyer tried to suggest she was an unreliable witness due to her emotional instability, Anna's response was devastating. "I may have lost my voice to grief, but I never lost my memory or my judgment. I know what I saw, and I know what Victor Kroll did to my husband." Emil testified about the attacks on the farm and the threats against Anna and Victor's confession to Heinrich's murder. His quiet dignity in the witness box contrasted sharply with Victor's increasingly desperate attempts to discredit him. Martha Crenshaw proved to be a formidable witness, her careful records and network of contacts providing documentation that Victor's expensive lawyers couldn't dismiss or explain away. She'd kept track of Victor's movements, his associates, and even his drinking habits with the thoroughness of someone who understood that details mattered when justice was at stake. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Victor Kroll was convicted on 14 counts, including murder, attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. The judge, clearly disgusted by the scope of Victor's crimes, sentenced him to life imprisonment, a sentence that, given the conditions in territorial prisons, was likely to be shorter than it sounded. As the bailiff led Victor away in chains, he turned for one final look at Anna. But instead of hatred or threats, his expression held something that might have been regret or perhaps simply the recognition of complete defeat. Anna met his gaze steadily, feeling nothing but pity for the man who'd wasted his life pursuing something he could never have had. The resolution came not with dramatic flourishes, but with the quiet satisfaction of problem solved and justice served. Victor's forged documents were officially declared fraudulent, and Anna's ownership of her farm was confirmed beyond legal challenge. The territorial government, embarrassed by the scope of crimes that had gone undetected for so long, established new procedures for investigating suspicious deaths and verifying debt claims. Sheriff Palmer, shamed by his earlier failures, but redeemed by his eventual action, used his knowledge of Victor's methods to help other victims recover their property. Several women came forward to reclaim farms and businesses that Victor had stolen through fraud and intimidation. Martha Crenshaw was honored by the territorial legislature for her role in exposing Victor's crimes, though she typically dismissed the attention with characteristic modesty. "I just kept good records," she told reporters. "Amazing what you can accomplish when you pay attention to details." Emil used his share of the reward money. The territorial government had offered substantial compensation for information, leading to Victor's conviction to make long overdue improvements to Anna's farm. A new well was dug, the barn was repaired and expanded, and enough livestock was purchased to make the operation genuinely profitable for the first time in years. But the most significant change was Anna herself. Her voice, once restored, proved to be a powerful tool for advocacy and reform. She began corresponding with women's rights organizations, sharing her story, and helping other victims of fraud and intimidation find their own voices. The general store clerk, who'd been so dismissive of Anna and Emil, was forced to apologize publicly when his connection to Victor's information network was revealed. He'd been feeding Victor details about Anna's finances and daily routine in exchange for small payments, information that had helped Victor plan his harassment campaign. The town of Dust Creek, shamed by their collective failure to help Anna when she needed it most, rallied to support her in the aftermath of Victor's conviction. Neighbors who'd avoided her for 2 years suddenly appeared with offers of help, food, and friendship. Anna accepted their assistance with grace. But she didn't forget who had stood by her when standing meant taking risks. 6 months after Victor's conviction, on a warm spring morning when the prairie was painted green with new growth, Anna and Emil stood in the farmyard discussing plans for the day's work. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar buggy. Doc Peterson, the town physician, was approaching with obvious urgency. "Mrs. Schultz, Mr. Bauer," Peterson called out as he climbed down from his buggy. "I have news that I thought you should hear immediately." Anna and Emil exchanged glances. Doc Peterson's expression was serious, but not grim. Whatever his news was, it wasn't tragic. Victor Kroll died in prison last night. Peterson announced without preamble. "Heart failure, according to the prison physician. Natural causes, though I suspect the strain of imprisonment was a contributing factor." Anna felt a complex mixture of emotions wash over her relief closure, and perhaps a touch of sadness for the man Victor might have been if he'd chosen a different path. "Thank you for telling us, Doc," Emil said quietly. "There's more." Peterson continued. "Victor had no family, no legitimate heirs. His estate, what's left of it, after restitution to his victims, is being distributed according to territorial law. As his primary victim and the person responsible for his conviction, you're entitled to a significant portion, Mrs. Schultz." Anna shook her head immediately. "I don't want his money, Doc. That's admirable, but perhaps impractical." Peterson replied gently. "The estate includes several properties that Victor acquired through fraudulent means. The territorial government wants to ensure they go to someone who'll use them properly, not sell them to the next opportunist who comes along." Emil stepped closer to Anna. "What kind of properties?" "Farmland, mostly. Good land that Victor stole from women like Anna. The government figures she'd know better than anyone how to help other victims get back on their feet." Anna looked at Emil, seeing understanding pass between them. This wasn't about accepting Victor's ill-gotten gains. It was about turning his legacy of destruction into something positive. "We could create a place for women who've lost everything," Anna said quietly. "Help them start over, give them resources and support. Emil nodded. A sanctuary, somewhere safe to rebuild. Doc Peterson smiled. I thought you might see it that way. There's one more thing. Victor left a letter. The prison chaplain said he wrote it just before he died. It's addressed to you, Mrs. Schultz. Anna accepted the sealed envelope with reluctance. Part of her wanted nothing more to do with Victor Kroll, even in death. But another part, the part that had found peace through justice, understood that some things needed to be completed. That evening, as she and Emil sat in their kitchen after supper, Anna opened Victor's final letter. The handwriting was shaky, weakened by illness and despair. But the words were clear. Anna, I am dying, and I find that facing death has a way of clarifying what truly matters. I have spent 47 years pursuing the wrong things for the wrong reasons, and I have hurt good people in the process. I cannot undo what I have done. I cannot restore the years of peace I stole from you, or bring back Heinrich, or repair the damage I caused to other women in my obsession with possessing what I could never truly have. But I can acknowledge the truth that I was too proud to admit while I lived. You were right to choose Heinrich over me. Not because he was a better man, though he was, but because you loved him. Love was never something I understood or valued, and that blindness cost me everything worth having. I hope you will find happiness with the man who stood by you when I tried to destroy you. He is what I pretended to be, but never was someone worthy of your trust. Use what I leave behind to help other women. Turn my legacy of harm into something that heals. It is the only way I can think of to balance even a small portion of the damage I have done. I am sorry, Anna, for all of it. Victor. Anna read the letter twice, then handed it to Emil without comment. He read it carefully, his expression thoughtful. He found some peace at the end, Emil said finally. Maybe. Or maybe he just wanted to feel better about himself before he died. Anna took the letter back and folded it carefully. Either way, he's right about one thing. We can use what he left behind to help other women. The sanctuary idea. Anna nodded. A place where women can come when they have nowhere else to go. Where they can heal learned skills, find their voices again. Emil reached across the table and took her hand. It's a big undertaking. It'll mean a lot of work, a lot of responsibility. Anna smiled. Good thing I have a partner who's not afraid of either one. Emil brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. Partners in everything. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning when the prairie grass had turned gold and the sky stretched endless and blue overhead, Anna Schultz and Emil Bauer were married in the small church in Dust Creek. The ceremony was simple, but well attended. It seemed the entire county had turned out to witness the union of two people who'd found love in the midst of adversity. Martha Crenshaw served as Anna's matron of honor, while Sheriff Palmer stood up for Emil, an arrangement that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. Doc Peterson performed the ceremony, having been ordained as a minister years before he became a physician. As they exchanged vows, Anna spoke in a clear, strong voice that carried to every corner of the church. I promise to stand with you in all weathers, to trust you with my fears and my hopes, to build something lasting from the foundation of love we've discovered together. Emil's response was equally heartfelt. I promise to protect what we've built, to honor the trust you've given me, to be the man you deserve in good times and bad. When Doc Peterson pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in applause that seemed to shake the church's rafters. As Anna and Emil kissed for the first time as a married couple, the sound of that celebration carried across the prairie like a promise of better days ahead. The reception was held at Anna and Emil's farm, with tables set up in the barn, and the entire community contributing food, music, and good wishes. Children ran between the tables, while adults danced to fiddle music and celebrated two people who'd found happiness against impossible odds. As the evening wore on and the last guests departed, Anna and Emil stood alone in their farmyard, looking up at the star-filled Kansas sky. Anna leaned into Emil's warmth, marveling at how different her life had become from what she'd expected just 1 year earlier. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd caught that train? Anna asked quietly. Emil considered the question. Sometimes. But then I remember that the best things in life usually happen when our plans fall apart. Anna laughed, the sound carrying joy instead of the bitter edge it might have held in darker times. Victor thought he was destroying me when he killed Heinrich and tried to force me into marriage. Instead, he gave me exactly what I needed, a reason to fight and someone to fight beside. Everything happens for a reason. Maybe. Or maybe we just learn to find reasons in everything that happens. Anna turned in Emil's arms to face him. Either way, I'm grateful. Emil kissed her forehead gently. For what, Anna? For you. For second chances. For learning that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just makes room for new love to grow alongside it. The sanctuary they established became a model for similar programs throughout the territories. Women who'd lost everything to fraud, abandonment, or violence found refuge there along with practical training that helped them build independent lives. Anna's own experience with voicelessness made her particularly effective at helping other women find their strength and their voices. Emil proved to be a natural administrator, his combination of practical skills and gentle authority making him ideally suited to manage the complex logistics of running a refuge for vulnerable women. He also established a network of contacts throughout the region, lawmen, judges, and business leaders who could provide assistance when legal or financial problems arose. The original farmhouse became the heart of a growing complex that included dormitories, workshops, and educational facilities. Anna and Emil lived in a modest home on the property close enough to provide support and oversight, but separate enough to maintain their own family life. 2 years after their marriage, Anna gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Hope, in honor of the quality that had carried them through their darkest times. Emil proved to be a devoted father, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he cradled his tiny daughter. Hope was followed by 2 more children, a son named Heinrich in honor of Anna's first husband, and another daughter called Martha in tribute to the woman whose courage had helped save Anna's farm. Emil embraced the role of father with the same dedication he brought to everything else. And Anna marveled at how easily he'd adapted to a life built around family and community, rather than solitude and survival. The children grew up surrounded by the women who came to the sanctuary, seeking help, some staying for weeks, others for months or even years, as they rebuilt their lives. Hope, Heinrich, and Martha learned early that families came in many forms, and that helping others was both a privilege and a responsibility. As the years passed, the story of Anna and Emil's victory over Victor Kroll became legendary throughout the territories. It was told and retold around campfires and in saloons, always with slight variations, but always with the same essential message, that justice was possible even when the odds seemed impossible, and that love could triumph over hatred when good people stood together. Anna continued to correspond with women's rights organizations, her letters carrying the authority of someone who'd lived through the struggles she wrote about. Several of her articles were published in Eastern newspapers, helping to raise awareness about the legal vulnerabilities that made women targets for predators like Victor Kroll. Emil's reputation as a protector of vulnerable people brought him offers to serve as sheriff or territorial marshal. But he consistently declined such positions. His calling was to the sanctuary and to his family, and he'd learned that some forms of service were more valuable than others. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Anna and Emil stood once again in their farmyard, watching the sun set over the prairie they'd fought so hard to keep. The sanctuary around them bustled with activity, women learning trades, children playing families, being rebuilt from the fragments of shattered lives. "Any regrets?" Emil asked, echoing a question Anna had posed years earlier. Anna considered the question seriously, as she always did. Their life hadn't been easy. Running a sanctuary required constant vigilance, endless fundraising, and the emotional toll of witnessing so much suffering. But it had been meaningful in ways that easier lives rarely achieved. "Only one," Anna said finally. Emil looked concerned. "What's that?" Anna smiled and pointed to a single red rose blooming beside their porch, a descendant of the bush that had somehow survived the fire Victor's men had set so many years earlier. "I regret that it took so much pain to bring us together. I wish we could have found each other in happier circumstances." Emil followed her gaze to the rose, remembering how that single bloom had seemed like a miracle in the aftermath of destruction. Now it had grown into a healthy bush that produced flowers every year, a living symbol of resilience and renewal. "Maybe," Emil said thoughtfully. "But would we have recognized what we had if it had come easily? Would we have valued it as much if we hadn't had to fight for it?" Anna leaned into his embrace, still marveling after all these years at how perfectly she fit against his side. "I suppose we'll never know. But I do know this: whatever path brought us together, I'm grateful we walked it." As the last light faded from the western sky, Anna and Emil Bauer walked hand in hand toward their home, surrounded by the family they'd built and the community they'd created. Behind them, the sanctuary settled into evening quiet, its windows glowing with warm light and the promise of safety for those who needed it most. The prairie wind carried the scent of growing things, the sound of laughter from the dormitories, and the whispered prayers of women who'd found refuge in a place built from love and defended by courage. It was a legacy that would endure long after its founders were gone, a testament to the power of two people who'd refused to surrender to hatred and fear. In the end, that was their greatest victory, not just over Victor Kroll and his schemes, but over the forces that tried to convince people that they were powerless, that justice was impossible, that love was a luxury they couldn't afford. Anna and Emil had proven all of those forces wrong. They'd shown that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they stood together, that love was not a luxury, but a necessity, and that justice delayed was not necessarily justice denied. Their story became part of the legend of the American West, a reminder that the frontier's greatest victories were not won with guns or gold, but with courage, determination, and the simple revolutionary act of refusing to give up on each other. And every spring, when the prairie came alive with new growth and the rose bush beside their porch burst into bloom, Anna and Emil remembered the night when their world had almost ended, and how that ending had become the beginning of something far more beautiful than either of them had dared to imagine. The silence that had once threatened to swallow Anna whole had been transformed into a voice that spoke for justice. The loneliness that had driven Emil to the edge of despair had been replaced by a love that multiplied rather than diminished when it was shared. Together they'd built something that would outlast them both, a sanctuary, not just for the women who sought refuge there, but for the idea that hope could survive even the darkest times, and that love, once found, could light the way forward for generations to come.